Well, good morning and hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning, From Project to Performance, Ensuring Operational Readiness in Energy and Power Capital Programs. You know, often we get to the end of the project and we get so excited because, hey, success, we got this thing done. But really, success shouldn't be measured at project completion, right? It's more often in the ability to utilize the information that we collect and run that asset long term. The operation of a facility is a much longer time frame than the project itself. And so today we're going to talk about just that, what it means to ensure that operational readiness. And I'm excited to be joined by a power-packed panel of experts around operational readiness. And so in order to kind of introduce the topic and introduce themselves, what we'll do is we'll go around the horn here with everyone on the panel and have you introduce yourself, who you work for, and then answer the question in your mind, what does operational readiness mean? So to begin, we'll start with Leslie.
Great, thanks AJ. So my name is Leslie Gowdish. I'm a Senior Managing Director at FTI Consulting within our construction projects and assets practice. I have more than 15 years of experience in digital strategy and transformation, which includes selecting, designing, implementing systems focused on engineering and construction-related capital and maintenance projects and portfolios. I also lead our technology enablement for North America. So really happy to be here. And so when I think about operational readiness, it's really being fully prepared to start, sustain, and safely operate assets, and doing this by ensuring that the people, processes, systems, and assets are ready to perform effectively and safely from the first day. And given my kind of expertise and more the technology side, I really look at how can technology enable those people, processes, and data to support that.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Jade, how about you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm the supervising engineer within ACCO Electric, a utility company in Alberta, Canada. We own and operate about 188 substations across 100 kilometers of distribution and transmission line for 100,000 customers. Asset management is centralized in ACCO Electric with three major wings: data, strategy, and financials. So I lead the data wing of the department, supervising a team of about 7 engineers and techs to help manage 1.4 million operating assets across the province. In terms of operational readiness, it means day one of operations, every asset's ready to start its life cycle and journey. So where is it? What is it? What supporting documents do we have? And even what are our plans for it? I think of it much like IT. You won't notice if this process is working well, but you'll certainly suffer down the road in much more difficult and expensive problems later on if it isn't working well.
That's a really good point. Jared, what about you?
Well, hello, everybody. Jared Rastegar. I am Senior Director heading up our energy industry strategy here at Kahua. And prior to Kahua, I spent some time in industry with a large global EPC and a multi-billion-dollar nuclear program. But most of my career has been on the construction technology side of the house. So I've got 15 years of experience in construction technology, supporting the industry specifically. And from a Kahua perspective, we've got, we offer a project management and asset-centric project management system that allows for multi-party collaboration on programs very similar to what Jay just mentioned. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, sir. And then last but certainly not least, Steve.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Morris. I'm Managing Director of Assets Advisory and Transformation at FTI Consulting, also the construction project and assets practice with Leslie. I have 30 years of experience in management consulting and essentially lead work in the Americas around helping businesses improve asset performance, reduce O&M costs, manage risk, those kinds of things. So really focused on operations. And to me, operational readiness is essentially having solved the handover challenges that inevitably occur from projects to operations, so that operations and maintenance is ready to go full speed at handover and has everything they need.
Great, thank you all. And my name is AJ Waters. I'm Chief Evangelist at Kahua. I will be moderating today's session. I do have a background in project controls and project management at a large energy and power EPC, but on this particular occasion, I'm just here to guide the conversation. So coming back to you, Stephen, you mentioned the challenges of operational readiness. FTI has seen firsthand what happens when owners don't plan early enough for operations. From your perspective, what are the most common pitfalls that lead to those gaps in handover?
Okay, that's a great question, AJ. I think the first pitfall is not thinking about what happens after the project is complete. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the project manager is typically focused on what is it going to take to deliver the asset on time and on budget, and so isn't really spending much time thinking about what the operations will need, concerned with getting everything that needs any kind of front-end engineering and design, procurement, contracts, getting contractors on board, all those things. And so it's generally not until a little bit later in the project that they actually even start thinking about it. So I think that's the first pitfall. You need to start when the project starts is when you should start thinking about operational readiness. I think another one is considering what data information will be needed by operations and what's the best way to collect it. Because a lot of the data and information that's required, as Jane mentioned, is information that is provided or should be provided when the project starts. Things like tagging the assets, collecting, PMIS, drawings, OEM manuals, those kinds of things. And so making sure you're starting to collect those early on and just thinking about what needs to be collected, thinking about how you're going to collect it, and then actually doing it. I think the third one, particularly if you are talking about what I'll call a large asset or asset system, like a substation, as Jane mentioned, or a refinery or plant, is also waiting too long to start developing processes and procedures, particularly if it's for a new asset. And so oftentimes those are things that are not thought about early enough in advance, and all of a sudden you're starting to get near turnover and you realize we don't have everything in place we need to be able to start up the plant and ramp it up to full speed.
So it's interesting, Stephen. Everything you talked about there is about planning ahead, right? Like we need to be making these decisions early in the project. And Jade, you even mentioned that the project should finish with the asset ready to start its life cycle, right? So Jade, when we talk about owners like trying to think ahead and instead of seeing the project finish as the finish line, it needs to be the starting line. Are there specific challenges that cause owners to overlook this starting line mentality?
Thanks, AJ. I jokingly I'll say money. So often your asset management team or your operational team is not in charge of the flow of money. So if your contractors or external construction is getting paid before deliverables come in, then you're chasing them down after the fact when they've already delivered a product. So getting ahead of that, embedding yourself in the process early, even before those financial transactions close, is really critical and part of a big challenge. The other is just the incentive model. If your project team is incented to go and install a bunch of smart devices, for example, and you're going to go deploy, you have a target of 200,000 smart devices that you need to deploy, and the only incentive or KPI you measure is, are they being deployed? Well, we had a pretty good internal follow-up of, we've deployed X smart devices, but half of them aren't communicating. So that doesn't really help you operationally. You really have to have a measure within your project of, are we deploying these devices and are they successful and operational and ready to go?
That's an excellent point. Yeah, we got it out there, but not very useful. Yeah, the right KPI, the right metric, what you measure gets done, right? That's the old quote. So shifting gears a little bit, Leslie, you kind of work in that intersection between project controls and transformation. And you mentioned that you specifically focus in on the tech a lot of the times. So are there processes or governance issues that you see preventing critical asset data from making it to the finish line in the right format or intact?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a number of different processes and governance issues that really can prevent the technology from really enabling that handover process. So you have things like poor definition of data requirements. You know, early on we heard from Steve and Jay talking about, you know, really needing to start that process early, and that comes with what are the asset data requirements that you have? What are the fields that you need? What is the format that you need? What's the metadata that you really need to have that? And that really needs to be defined early on during project planning or within FEED, because otherwise you're getting off to a late start and you're trying to get that data early. And data is really going to be the key to this. You know, you also have your, you know, EPCs and your contractors that want to deliver data in their own format. So this is often inconsistent with either the operator's asset management system or within the same project or portfolio. You can have varying EPCs that again have their own format or data standards that they're using. And so there's not that standardized data handover template or digital interface that you can use. And so again, it ends up turning out to be a very manual process where you're getting data within PDFs, you're getting it in spreadsheets, you're getting unstructured files. And this means when you're doing this in a manual kind of load of getting the data into these systems afterwards, you don't really know what is that one version of the truth. Is it this file that's been uploaded, or is it a later file that's been uploaded? You don't have that data exchange processes in place to be able to automate that. And so with that, then information can get corrupted or duplicated or just lost in transfer, even if it's provided at all. So having processes in place that can handle that is really important. And then even if you get that data, now the problem is, do you have processes in place for data verification? So often that is left until the end of the project. You're trying to meet the deadlines of, you know, as Steve mentioned earlier, we just want to get the project done, and you're not thinking about what's the data, how is the data actually quality good? And so really being able to put a process in place for doing the data verification is really important to make sure you don't have the missing tags, mismatched requirement IDs, and things like that. But then you also, of course, have governance issues. So I mentioned about having the EPCs and the contractors. If you don't have adequate contractual requirements in place, then you're not having an enforcement of what are those data deliverables, the formats, the standards that need to be there. Quite often in the contracts, you see things around documentation deliverables, but not data deliverables. So really making sure that from a governance perspective, you're putting the right contractual requirements in place. And then I guess the last thing I would say would really be around just kind of the lack of standards around, you know, kind of what's the taxonomies that are you going to use? Maybe even across your own company, you don't have a standard for tag naming, for asset hierarchy or data structure. And so getting some consistency and governance around your standards really needs to be in place in order for you to take advantage of that technology to help with that operational readiness.
That's a really important point, because what I find interesting about everything you just said there, Leslie, is that the data exists, right? In no place did you say we don't have the data. It was a lot about governance and process and organization of the data. Jared, you mentioned at the intro this idea of asset-centric project management, where you put the asset at the focus instead of the project. How does that mindset shift change the way that we're delivering projects? Does it help ensure that this data flows cleanly into operations? It's organized right?
I think there's there's the technology side of that, and as Leslie said, there's the process side of it. Both are extremely important, and I think Leslie made a really excellent point of saying, look, there's got to be contractual language in place that says this is not only what has to be provided, but when it has to be provided, and in what structure and in what form. And when that's in place, that's an excellent start. It's hard, it's hard work to define standards and define what data is important, beyond just, hey, what documentation is important. That unstructured data is important too, but the data itself is important. And if we can get a little more prescriptive early on and doing it in a progressive model. So I think the historical, as we wait to, Steve mentioned this, we wait towards the end of the project and suddenly we scramble to try to do that as we're, by the way, demobilizing staff, and that makes things very difficult. What we want to do is have a progressive collection that defines at each stage, hey, what do I need by the time I'm at mechanical completion, what do I need to have? At the time I'm ready for pre-commissioning, what data do I need to have? And Leslie did a really good job, I think, of pointing out there's got to be a verification process in place. And then the technology supports that, and defining what that technology is right from the beginning, in the early stages is, I think, really important to help democratize how we're going to do that and then hand it over intelligently.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I just want to add to that. I mean, I think that you're hearing kind of that common theme about, can we start the process early? So part of that is defining the requirements early. Part of it's then collecting it early. Then it's doing the data validation of it early, so that as you kind of go through your project of building and creating that asset, when you get to the end, you really have everything in place and you're just doing the kind of final steps for that. You mentioned demobilizing the team. I mean, that's also it, right? Is that there's no data owner like accountability quite often. There's a number of people that own the data. Those people might now be partially off the project. They had earlier, they were probably earlier on involved and now they're gone. And so getting that data owner, so really starting it early, I think, is where that kind of asset-centric approach comes from. Let's think of the project and what we need at the end. That really will help facilitate owners to be operational ready.
So it's interesting because we can all talk about this all day long, but like, Jade, in practical terms, from the owner's point of view, what does structuring your data and your workflows differently look like? Like, is that something that you can take an asset first approach with as an owner?
For sure, AJ. Like, our asset teams, our geospatial team, our CMMS teams are built into our application workflows. So for our high volume projects, there is tasks they need to complete before a project can be closed out. So, and importantly, we talk a lot about data and documents. Like, our working documents are consistent across teams. So engineers are producing digital data forms that are used by construction. And then those same forms that are used by construction are then entered by the geospatial team or by our CMMS team, right? And that form looks the same for construction, engineers, and the data team. So, we're kind of consistently using the same data object that's just getting improved and revised throughout the process. And, kind of lastly, at least, I think a lot about it from a safety standpoint. So here we have a mandate that our mapping system has to be updated before that line can be energized. So a project may not even go live if our data systems aren't operational or ready to go, because it could be a safety concern. Someone could activate the wrong switch, a line could be energized on a mapping system and be somewhere else in real time, somewhere else in the province or in the system. So, it's really important to think about what are our safety concerns and what are the downstream impacts as well. And just knowing and having that consistent communication between your asset management or operational practices built into your construction processes.
That's a responsible approach too. And it sounds like ACCO has been able to make that mindset shift, like to get the technology right, but also to get the data right. Stephen, the important part there is the mindset shift. You've got to adopt new technology with a new mindset. If you adopt new tech without changing mindset, you run into a lot of struggle and even a lot of pushback, right, from the end users. What do you see as the role of leadership in driving an asset-centric culture across project teams and contractors?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key thing is that leadership always has to be the one driving change for it to be effective and for it to be across the organization as a whole. Within small teams, you can drive change internally, but leadership's got to do it. And the biggest thing is what I like to call walking the talk. Right? Everybody talks about change management. Everybody talks about importance, but for it to really hit home, they have to stress the importance of operational readiness, and they also have to provide the ongoing governance and oversight of the operational readiness processes to ensure that they're being adhered to. I mean, I often see organizations implement changes, whether it's around operational readiness or anything else, and see it fail because essentially we'll call it the change management is treated as a project, right? It's focused mainly on training, making sure people understand what the new processes are, understand what you're trying to do, but it's not really focused on long-term embedding the processes and making sure the mindsets are created. One of the ways to do that, as Jade mentioned, is having the right performance metrics, having performance metrics defined for operational readiness. That leadership is looking at to see one are the processes conforming to whatever the definition, the standard is, and identifying if there are non-conformances, and then using that to drive improvement. And once again, leadership has to be involved. They have to be looking at those metrics, and if those metrics aren't meeting the targets, they have to be, making sure that whatever corrective action is defined and taken, and that it actually gets embedded, because you often see new processes get implemented. They might be adhered to for a short period of time, but then there's a lot of backsliding and people go back to how they did things before.
Yeah, old workaround, like this worked, this is cumbersome, I'm going to go back and do the old thing. Okay, so we've got our data taxonomy figured out. We've got our culture aligned and our mindset shift made. So let's talk tech for a minute, Jared. There's more technology on job sites than we've ever seen, but rarely is that tech actually talking to one another, right? So like, even though we can collect all this data in construction, can we actually use it? Like, what's the realistic path to integrating systems between construction and operations that owners can actually get benefit out of?
I think the sad reality is there probably is some consolidation that has to occur with systems. We've got data in lots of different pockets and lots of different areas inside the organizations that I interact with on a regular basis, and that's a natural part of our progress and evolution in terms of getting better at using technology to improve how we do projects. But it has reached a point where both for operations teams and for constructions it's a little fatiguing, honestly. You get, just a little bit of overwhelm that comes along with that. So one is kind of consolidating into kind of a best of breed approach, and then taking those best of breed systems, and to your point, AJ, integrating them together in a meaningful way. And often that can be used as a buzzword. We say integration like it's a magic wand and you wave it around and suddenly there's magic that happens. And it does take, similar to what we were talking about before about defining the process and the flow of data and how it should be used, is we have to do the same thing between systems, is making sure we've said, look, which system is this the source of truth for this at what stage, and then where do we conceptually hand that over. And organizations like FTI do an excellent job of helping people kind of coach through that process and understanding kind of where the value is to make those integrations meaningful and realistic, in my opinion.
So then, to that point, Leslie, from your seat, what is the biggest barrier to achieving data interoperability? Is it the tech, or is it cultural, or is it maybe even contractual, like we're not asking for it? Like, which one do you think is the biggest, or is it something else?
I mean, they're definitely all three are barriers. I would say, from the technical side, you might have issues with legacy systems, which may not have, again, the data in the same way that you want to have it in another system. They might lack API capability or be able to support modern standards. Again, going back to the inconsistency data models across it, but what I'd say is more modern solutions like data lakes using digital twins, PMIS systems, your asset management systems, middleware, all of that can really solve a lot of those technical challenges. But that's if that cultural and that contractual alignment exists. So I really do think those are kind of probably the bigger barrier. And Steve touched on this earlier, and as did Jade. From a cultural standpoint, project teams really do have that short-term project focus, right? So where projects are incentivized to be on time and on budget, they're not really looking to deliver interoperable data for long-term operations. That's not what their metrics are for. You have that lack of data leadership culture. So if your executive company is not backing, hey, we need to have the enterprise data governance and in place, then that interoperability becomes a technical afterthought. And then you also, of course, have the contractual side that I spoke about earlier, where you might have where your organization wants to have the interoperability, but you don't have those contracts in place to even ask for it. Again, a lot of owners are relying on having their EPCs provide that data. So if the contracts don't have the data deliverables defined, it just says we need documents. It doesn't say what data standards we need. If it's being done in a different format, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, not having that data validation. We have milestones for something like mechanical completion, but we don't have a data readiness milestone. So really, if we don't have those cultural and contractual things in place, then the technology is going to be stopped before it even begins.
And that's interesting because when we lack those contractual requirements and we lack the interoperability, Stephen, that's where we hear about the project after the project, right? That kind of painful, expensive period where we got to clean it all up post handover before we can actually become operationally ready. So what steps can owners take during construction to eliminate that scenario altogether? Is it truly just, here's what you have to give it to me, or are there more steps that they can take?
Well, I think there's a number of key things, so the first thing they have to do is identify what is it they need? What data are we going to need? What information are we going to need? And then, define, once again, create a process for collecting that data, technology, however, again, they've got to think through how are we going to do this? Like Leslie said, it's got to be in the contract. But, collecting the critical asset data, make sure they understand what is critical. This includes things like collecting and tagging documents, attributes, any files associated with an asset. I think there's other pieces from a data standpoint. It's not quite from a data standpoint, but that's making sure there's sufficient operational and maintainability review during design, because sometimes their designs get implemented, they get constructed, and then there's operational issues. And I know that's not exactly data, but it does have to do with changing the data. The other thing is to make sure there is a review process, so you can't just set up some kind of we'll call it requirement for contractors or even internal crews if you're doing the work internally to provide data. There's got to be a review to make sure it's correct. I'm working with a client right now, and they're finding they're getting a lot of their as-builts back that are not accurate. They're not correct, and because there's not a kind of like quality control review to make sure the data is correct. So I would say also making sure that it's correct, and then as Jade sort of mentioned, and Jay can talk more about it if she wishes, but the idea that using that data and start your planning with that data. Once you understand what the assets are, we're collecting asset on the data, start developing those plans, your strategies, your own strategies, plans, and processes, because that's another piece, is that I don't know that we consider it data, but that's, your preventive maintenance, your PMs are going to be in the system. They should be in the system at the same time that that asset is, entered into the system. So when that asset is handed over, it's in the system, you should have your PMs, whatever kind of inspections, tests, whatever, that should be set up too. So making sure that data is communicated to asset management or O&M or whoever is the right group to develop those plans and processes.
I think there's a couple of things you said there that I think really jump out to me is one is, and here we're saying the word data a lot, but a lot of times you hear the word data and you think IT, and it's more of a business data decision and business governance that goes along with that. The other bit that I think is particularly important is that idea of preventative maintenance. You're not getting a facility all at once, and there's warranty considerations there, and making sure that we've got a good record of the inspections that are occurring and when they are occurring, and we know how to perform those inspections and what activities have to be done. I think those are really important things. I'd love to hear, Jade, if you have any additional thoughts on that as well, if you're open to communicating.
Yeah, I think about kind of earlier, I talked about the life cycle is beginning, and I'd say it's probably already began by the time you started construction. Like that thing has already been manufactured, and we have conversations with manufacturers to go put unique identifiers on the nameplate as they're being manufactured, right? So having those conversations very early, and when you receive an asset operationally, like it's entering your portfolio and hopefully a mature asset class, and it's ready to be worked on. Like it should have worked within the next year, 2 years, and that all needs to be set up and planned for and accounted for. And if you don't have a good understanding of what assets you have coming in and even how to maintain them, you're going to quickly run into situations where you're quickly having more emergencies or reactive work than you have planned work.
So what I find interesting about all this, Jade, obviously ACCO really has a handle on this, and I mean that's part of the reason why you're on the panel today, to share some of that wisdom. But you still work in one of the most complex and regulated environments out there, energy. So when you look at your own portfolio, are there still challenges that you're facing with operational readiness? Like, are there things that your team still struggles with that you're engaging with and trying to solve for?
I think the things we really, struggle with are the same things that everyone else struggles with. So people, processing, and culture. People are expected to change roles every 3 to 5 years now. So if you have tribal knowledge that's not written down, it's lost, and it's lost quite quickly. Processes and documentation go stale and surprisingly quickly. And culture is its own celestial object that waxes and wanes. So, kind of as Steve mentioned before, all of those need to be embedded. You need to commit to your processes, and you need to have regular review and assessment and connecting with people during onboarding and regular training so they understand those processes. So I always say, the new people in your organization who understand the asset management direction and vision will set the standard and culture going forward, right? So over the 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you're constantly trying to mature and set higher benchmarks of maturity. And you need to keep checking in when you onboard and train people to make sure that they're hitting those targets for you. Otherwise, you will slide backwards, and you'll slide backwards quite quickly. And it's hard to get back to where you want to be. You want to spend most of your time moving forward, not recouping ground you lost.
Right. So then what does success look like at Handover? Like, you mentioned the KPI where deployed smart devices wasn't really the right metric, right? You had to get them operationally working. Are there data points or reports or KPIs that your project teams use to define success, so you know what success looks like at Handover?
Yeah, I'd say within the project teams, we have like an internal deliverable list. There is a checklist at the end of every project that needs to be, checked off. And a checklist is a tool, Ours is digital. It's built into a project management system, right? And we find that helps quite a bit internally. We still really struggle with external projects, things that are delivered by, turnkey contractors, small repairs and replacements that don't go through a huge project management cycle, and emergency work. So, each year we deal with wildfires, and the time to action, your project might be 6 months for a transmission line. We might put a transmission pole back in the ground in 4 days after a wildfire. So, that acceleration of speed are all areas where those things get missed. Internally, we're working really hard on classifying our data into asset classes that are well defined and well documented with data dictionaries, and then converting those data dictionaries into audits and quality metrics, so we can be aware of recent and existing gaps. Really, having that opportunity to audit that work, and eventually, hopefully, and maybe this will come up a bit later, automatically.
That would be ideal, right? So we've kind of talked about two different people groups today. We've talked about the construction teams, and we've talked about kind of the asset maintenance or operations teams. And in there, we talked a lot about process and technology, but those are people too. So, like Leslie, these are two distinctly different groups of people. Sometimes there's an us versus them mentality. What changes need to happen, between people within organizations to make these asset-centric approaches really stick?
Yeah, AJ, you're right. I mean, there really is can be two different mindsets that we see here. You have you really need to have that shift that goes from a delivery mindset into more of that life cycle mindset. So as we've kind of spoken about a couple times during this, traditionally those project teams focus on delivering that asset on time and on budget, and operations really care about running it safely and reliably. And that different means projects often treat handover at that finish line, operations the starting point, as you kicked it off earlier, AJ. So really to kind of help shift that mindset from that delivery to that life cycle, the project teams and the operations teams really need to work together early. Bringing the operations into more of the design and planning stages, so that the maintainability, the data, the safety needs that they're looking for really can be defined early, and they're more invested in the project, and so they're looking at the success of this as well early on. I think Steve had touched on earlier, and maybe Jade as well, the success metrics, right? So sharing that accountability, sharing success metrics that are the same for both teams. You're not just measuring success by project completion, but by really what is the operational readiness to have that safe startup, the great data quality, and be able to sustain that performance. And treating data as an asset and not just as that afterthought. Ensure that you've got your warranties and maintenance schedules in place, and the asset information is validated and transferred in a usable form. And so really, success comes from when projects and operations teams see themselves as really just one team together, jointly responsible for delivering that asset and making sure that it's ready to operate safely and efficiently. And I know this is kind of question was geared towards, how do they need to work together? But part of it is also on both sides. It's a change between understanding what is the overall change that needs to occur. When we talk about construction and operations team, quite often change is not a word that people like to hear. So really just having both teams being open to a change in how you think about the need for data, how you can collect that data, how you verify that data, and how you use that data and the technology that you can use to enable it, really can be overlooked by those teams. And so having that change in the mindset just from both teams to being open to that data, to that technology, and how it can really help support them getting that operational readiness is really a step that needs to be taken as well.
Yeah, and it's it's important to note, right? Like we've talked a lot about a lot of best practices today. We've thrown a lot at you. Like you've seen what it looks like from a perspective of being efficient at this, but a lot of people are probably sitting on the other side of the screen going, we have so far to go. Like this is aspirational to be sure, but there's a lot of work to be done. Stephen, if an organization wanted to start tomorrow but start small, what's like one practical step they could take tomorrow that would start to make a measurable difference?
Right. Well, I mean, the data and information about the assets are the key to operating, maintaining them safely, reliability, as Leslie said. So I think the most, the one sort of small practical step is to make sure you understand what data / information is needed, right? What do you actually need to be able to operate and maintain the assets safely, reliability, and then what's the methodology for collecting the data to make sure data and information to make sure it's good? There's technology out there that can help you. There's lots of other things, but I think just starting with, do we know what information and data we need? And can we come up with a way to make sure we're collecting it and we're collecting good data? That's the place to start. And then you can go from there and look at developing, implementing technology, developing more sophisticated processes, and all those other things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Step one is always like, what do I need? What is required? Jared, you've been doing this a while. Is there a step that you could recommend that people could take tomorrow that would make a difference?
I mean, we said it a little bit earlier about kind of what gets measured is what gets managed, and if we're not measuring % complete of our data, we always talk about % complete of our project. That's a common thing to think about, but I was with a client and we were showing some examples of % complete of data and how that's done on a per system basis and a per subsystem basis. And suddenly you could just see this aha of, oh, why aren't we managing the % complete of our data? And I think that's maybe a very practical way to measure, and that kind of drives the behavior. It reminds me a lot of construction-centered design, getting construction involved earlier, getting operations involved a little earlier in the process, I think has some big fruit.
And Jay, coming from the perspective of someone who's at a company that's been through this and has kind of gotten over that hump and is in a good place, what was one of the things that you all did that really had a big impact? That's maybe a small step that could make big change.
So Steve mentioned it earlier, but your executive buy-in is critical. So, you can try to make any of the grassroots policies and procedures that you want to, but it's only as good as the company's soil. So, what we have inside of ACCO Electric is a document signed by our president that talks about our asset management principles and a leadership commitment that we as a company are going to adhere to them and that we're going to work towards them. And I think it really starts with having executive and leadership buy-in at the highest level. Leslie mentioned it earlier, but also just a cultural shift that if your right arm is healthy but your left foot is rotting off, the whole body's going to suffer. So if you have a really strong construction team and projects team, but you can't operate your assets either, you're going to suffer down the road. And just that mindset that you are working together towards a common goal. And there is a common goal that leadership sees, and it has been written down and signed. And there is something that you can bring to those conversations of like, we need to work together. Like we are a single organism or entity.
I love that analogy. Like if one piece is kind of swaying, the whole body's going to suffer. All right, so we're coming up a little closer on time, and I want to make sure to leave some time for the audience to ask some questions of the panelists. So again, if you would like to submit a question, there's a Q&A panel on the webinar here. Feel free to put your questions in there. And while folks do that, I have one last question because it's contractually required. We asked about this in the year 2025. Looking to the future, Jade, how do you see AI and predictive analytics reshaping this conversation around operational readiness? Are we finally to a point where owners can see risks before they happen?
I think we're getting there. So AI, I think, is an amazing technology. We're using it for wildfire smoke, for example. So instead of having a person sit on 100 cameras and paying 100 people to look at 100 cameras, you can have AI monitor cameras for wildfire smoke. And that's an incredible use of AI. Like you would not want to, you probably wouldn't want that job anyways, to do it as a person. And I think about the same thing within an operating company. Like you might have a transformer or a generator or something in your facility that has 100 real-time data points. And we didn't really talk about real-time data, which is its own special beast, I think. But you know, that transformer generator has a normal operating condition and it can be unhealthy. It can be anomalous, and AI can do fantastic work there in telling you that this thing is not operating the way you expect it to at the optimal performance level. So we're really interested in that untapped potential. There's almost too much data for people to handle at that point. And just the 24/7 monitoring, like you don't want to pay for that unless it's an alarm-based system, which is pretty common, but AI can really get ahead and start working into your asset health models and your risk modeling to support you in making decisions.
That's an excellent point. Like those jobs that nobody really wants. That's a perfect application for AI. Why not? Leslie, from your point of view, how do you see in the future AI and predictive analytics reshaping this operational readiness conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely correct that you really can't in 2025 not talk about AI and predictive analytics, right? That's kind of the big buzzwords right now. And as Jade mentioned, you know, we're already starting to see that. She referenced the fact that there's so much data, right? So yes, we love the data, but sometimes that data can be overwhelming, and really using AI to help manage that data and be able to get to information quickly. And so you're already seeing it in a lot of these technologies that are building the AI chatbots, where you can ask it questions and be able to get that information, you know, that might be buried, you know, down in your database, and you can find it quickly. And so we're already seeing technology companies do that. When we're looking at things around, you know, we talked a lot about having all of the documents available to you. And so you've got the natural language AI that can support mining the documents and getting out, you know, the warranty information and the maintenance intervals and compliance requirements quickly. And also knowing that data, you know, is quality, because you're able to see, you know, where did it come from, and know and have the confidence that it's coming there. And that's all because of AI. And then, you know, you have all of this data, and now you can use predictive analytics to start looking at, you know, when is an asset going to fail? Being able to see that early on and be able to address it. So, you know, you're always going to have your planned outages and shutdowns and turnarounds and things like that. Those are fine and those are expected. And ideally, you want to be able to predict those. You don't want to have to go into those unplanned. And so I do see those, you know, the predictive analytics being able to help us, you know, kind of with that long-term operational maintenance and support. So really, AI is easing some of the barriers. It's speeding up the process to true operational readiness. You've got the predictive analytics that can help support that long-term operation viability. I think we're just at the starting point. So we're there, but we have, you know, I think we have a long road ahead of us where we're going to see continued benefits.
Yeah, everything's it's like right on the cusp, right? Like the AI is there, but we still have to find the real solutions in the places to use it. Jared, if you were to pull out your crystal ball and look at the future, where do you see AI reshaping this conversation?
I like a lot of what Jade and Leslie shared, of practical uses. I think that's maybe the most important thing. I think we're at this juncture where there's, quite a lot of gimmicks and, buzz around it, but not a lot of value in there, but it's got the huge potential for value. So, what I hear from clients across the board is, first of all, is my data secure? When we talk about AI, do I have a strategy for this is going to be private data that is not being, incorporated into public models and necessarily exposing us to risk as a company. And then I think in terms of just practical uses, all things that lead to uptime. I really like what Jade said about, analyzing operational data, the conditions of a piece of equipment, and being able to say, hey, this is performing at its optimal level, and we think it's going to continue to perform at its optimal level. The other thought is supply chain wise, are we informing our supply chain of, hey, this is a piece of equipment that is maybe not performing to our standard, and are we incorporating that into our supply chain so it doesn't make it back in to one of our facilities on an ongoing basis? So I think there's a lot of potential. It starts with some of the practical steps that we talked about just getting the data and getting it, sanitized and getting the right information to be able to then leverage it for the use cases we just discussed.
Yeah, I like the supply chain analogy too, right? Like, why keep buying something that keeps failing? But if you don't know that it continues to fail and you don't have the data ready, then you can't make that adjustment. Stephen, again, last but certainly not least, is there anything they missed on the AI conversation that you'd like to add?
Yeah, just in interest of time, I'll be sort of quick. I think one of the key items is when we talk about data and information, collecting data information, and there's a lot of manual effort involved in that. And I think this is where AI is really going to help. Everything from design, procurement, construction, there's lots of documentation in there, documentation about the assets. And I think, AI can go through, pull that information. We talked about, Jade specifically talked about having this asset data form that's filled in. Like, AI can do a lot of that. I think there needs to be quality control checking of that, but can take some of the, I'll call it the manual labor out of, collecting data and information. And I think the other piece of that is, having access to the data and information, having access to the OEM manuals, knowing what other current existing assets is. AI can also help start developing frameworks for operation and maintenance, process and procedures, maybe even identifying the need where new training is required to support the assets by understanding, here's the kind of capabilities we have, these new assets, they're requiring a different kind of training. So I think it can be one of those things that really can add value. It'd probably be a multiplier for operational readiness, just reducing some of the maybe human time needed to do all those things manually.
Yeah, I agree. It's the biggest time sucks, I think, are going to be the place where AI gives us the most bang for our buck. And a lot of that has to do with data entry. All right, we got a few questions coming in from the audience. Jade, I'm going to ask this first one of you, mainly because you brought up the topic of safety early on, but others can chime in as well after Jade. But Jade, this question comes from a safety director. Speaking on operational readiness from a construction perspective, I'm always tasked with early on developing the accident prevention plan, and the earlier involvement in the life cycle of the project and data collection would definitely help. How do you suggest getting teams on board? I've collected and analyzed the data needed to accomplish my tasks. I just have not found a way to drive teams to value that need. Any suggestions on how to mine the information in a quick and quality manner?
That's a tough one. I think, especially if you're one person, it depends on the size of your team. But if you're trying to connect with every project in a consistent way, that can be extremely challenging. Having people store your documentation in a well-organized and common place. For example, like all of our projects exist on a network drive, and they're all organized by a number, and it's very easy to find. Like, there is a safety folder in there that you can go and mine and go and collect or have your team work through. And we have the same thing for our environment, for example, or for our drawings. Like, each project is very consistent in its particular document layout and delivery. In terms of having people connect with you, I think it's like commonality. Like you need to find a supervisor or a manager or someone else who can buy in with you. Like you need a champion. So I think about this for every kind of change management process. You need to find someone in that group who can hopefully work with you as a champion, right? And kind of leverage that connection to your team and say like, I'm the safety champion and I'm going to support my operational team or project team through the safety activity because I understand the value because I've had these conversations with the safety team.
Yeah, I love what you just mentioned, Jade, about the champion. So I'm very passionate about change management with technology. You see a lot of folks that are maybe adverse to change, but in particular when it comes to change management. And we always talk about having a champion as being that person that can help kind of drive that culture and that need for change. I think the other aspect of it is looking at, how can you influence them to say it's important to them as well? Why is it important that we're collecting this data to have that accident prevention plan? What is the benefit that I'm going to see from it? And maybe it's because overall the company is going to do better because we're going to have less accidents, which means our safety is going to go up, which means that we are going to, as a company, be better from an operational standpoint. So finding the ways that you can tell folks why it's going to benefit them helps drive them to actually do that for you, as opposed to you pushing it and saying you must provide this data for me.
Thank you both. All right, next one, Leslie, I'm actually going to start with you, and this will be the last one that we have time for. But again, if others want to chime in after Leslie, please do. Where do you see an engineering digital twin combined with an information standards component and a progressive handover process as an approach to support success with asset readiness?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so really with a digital twin, you're talking about a landscape of systems that are working together to provide the information quickly, visually for you to be able to ingest it well. And so having those data standards are going to be important to make sure that you've got the right data that you need, that you are being able to visualize it in the way. And one of the great things also, and when we talk about how can that support operational readiness, is it gives you the ability to do, what if scenarios. And so you can plan ahead of time. What are the things that might change when I'm ready to move to operations? What are those things? What are those scenarios that I might encounter, and be able to look at those ahead of time to really to have you be more ready for operations.
Well, I guess I'll add to that. I think that's where a project management information system can add a lot of value. Is you have data, from all sorts of different avenues, both internal and external, from various different sources that relate to assets, and integrating that with a digital twin strategy and making sure that you're, pulling in some of that data that you're capturing in a PMIS system, I think is hugely valuable in the process as well. And then again, that just supports that better and cleaner and more operational ready handover.
Just to chime in at the end, I think a lot about ISO 5500, 55,000. Like inside of that is an asset information strategy. And there's lots of really good conversation about that, of like becoming a more mature company. And not everyone has to follow an ISO standard, but there's a lot of good support in building out your asset management systems and operational principles in that document of like, how do we mature and how do we continue to mature, and having that strategic document, not only for how you are tactically managing your strategy, but also the long-term strategy, I think is essential. So.
Yeah, exactly. Tactically being the key there, right? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to the blocking and tackling. We've got to get those executable steps done, or we don't have the deliverable that we're searching for. All right, well, we are out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate your participation, and a special thank you to the panelists for the wisdom that they shared. If you have any follow-up questions for our panel, I'm sure you can find them on LinkedIn or through the contact information provided with the webinar. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate
Thank
y'all.
you.